So I was half wrong when it comes to the GPD Win 5. Turns out it is actually a really good handheld, minus a few negatives. For those that haven't heard of this device, this is currently the most powerful handheld on the market. By a lot. It isn't even close comparing it to something like an ROG Xbox Ally X or a Lenovo Legion Go 2, which most people are familiar with. All of this is because it's using the Ryzen Max 385 or the Ryzen Max Plus 395 processors. My device here today is actually the 385 version. But what that means is this truly is the one handheld in the world that can play every game out there right now, and at medium or better settings with good frame rates. The catch, of course, is the price. I paid $1,500 for this specific device here, and this is the cheapest model that you can get at the moment, the Max 385 model. But it does look like costs have gone up a little bit since then. I'm assuming that these prices come down with some coupons and all that sort of thing, but this is from GPD Mini PC, which is where I personally bought it from. But you can pretty much expect to pay at least $1,500 for this device. That is a lot of money, and so this naturally is an enthusiast level device. It isn't for everybody, but it's for those of you that have a lot of disposable income and you just want the best, most powerful handheld out there. It's the GPD Win 5. Now, I was only half wrong about the GPD Win 5. Before getting this, one of my main worries was that the 80 watt-hour battery that is actually removable would be unwieldy to use and uncomfortable to use. And it is actually just something that attaches to the back of the device. And yeah, it is extremely uncomfortable to use when it is attached to the device. It is unwieldy. It is everything that I thought it would be before getting the device. So from that perspective, I tried using this. I've had this device for about a month or so now. I've tried using the battery for about a day and I never went back. I've used this plugged in for my entire time using it, and the battery has just kind of stayed in the box. It's kind of useless. I would not suggest and I would not buy this with the battery because I don't find it very comfortable. And so my use case with this device and what we're going to talk about today is how I used it tethered. I used a USB-C cable to a USB-C charger, and I was just on my couch the entire time playing with this device without a battery and anything like that, which means that it does have to be connected to power for it to stay on. That does kind of defeat the purpose of a handheld and portability of it. I get that, but there is a use case, and I've kind of discovered that using this device where I don't really use the handheld outside of my home anyways. I have other handhelds for that. So this is specifically an at-home couch device. Now there are a few caveats to this scenario. Because of how powerful the processor is and how high you can push the TDP, USB-C charging is a little bit wonky. I have a 160 watt U-Green charger, and I had to go through a bunch of USB-C cables to find one that would actually let me boot the handheld from shutdown and also have it stay on without turning off. Because of how much power this can use, you run into that scenario where it might use more power than what you're giving it through the USB-C cable. And so it's one of the known setbacks to this. Now, GPD does include their own charger in the box, but it is huge. It is bulky. It has a barrel end that goes into the device. And honestly, if you wanted to push this device to the highest it can go, you would have to use this. But I never once wanted to do that for reasons we'll talk about later. And I find this charger to just be way too big and bulky. So anyways, I found a 240 watt USB-C cable and my 160 watt charger, and that worked great for me to use this device comfortably at 30 to 35 watts TDP. Now I do want to be clear, if I go higher than that to like a 55 watt, 60 watt TDP, I did have issues where it would just shut off and all of that because not enough power. But I have found that the sweet spot for this device is 30 to 35 watts of TDP for fan noise and heat and everything. But it's important to know the big negative with this whole setup. I can't turn on the device when it's not plugged in. So you have to be connected to power. And with that comes a few unintended negatives. I've had a few times over the month where I accidentally moved the wrong way and yoink, cable went out and power and the device turns off. Or maybe the USB-C just shifts a little bit and suddenly the device just turns off. And weird things like that. I will say it was only a handful of times over the month, but it was enough for me to be a little bit wary about saving my game often so that I didn't have to have anything lost when the device just randomly shuts off because something weird happened. I think one thing I would have loved to see on this is a small internal battery. 5,000, 10,000 milliamp hours, something small like that. Just enough to give you that little bit of a, oh no, something happened, I better plug it back in. Or, you know what, I want to bring this upstairs and play with it there without having to shut it all off, turn it back on, and all of that. This is mitigated a little bit on the Windows side when you have Hibernate and all of that, but I've been using Bazzite alone on this device, and I wasn't able to have it just go into a Hibernate mode and then bring it back anywhere else. Whenever it shut off, it was shutting off. Back to the TDP and power conversation though, the GPD Win 5 can hit 85 watts of TDP power using their included charger. But I found that to be extremely unusable in every sense of the word. First, the fans are insane at the highest level of power. The heat is also crazy, and while that gives you the absolute best performance, I just didn't find it to be necessary. Instead, like I said, I have found that the sweet spot is 30 to 35 watts of power. It's a beautiful sweet spot for manageable heat, manageable noise, and all of that. So that's why today I'm really only going to talk about my experience using this device, how I used it, which was tethered, 30 to 35 watts of power, and that's pretty much it. This is one of those devices that overmarkets its capabilities. Sure, you can play at 85 watts, but you're never going to get an opportunity to do so unless you're docking it somewhere you can't hear it. Now, as somebody who has had pretty much every GPD device released, besides the Win Max, one constant with GPD devices is they've never figured out heat and they've never figured out fan noise. I don't want to say it's any different here. I think the main difference here is that at 30 to 35 watts, up to that point, it's all good on my end. I like it. But after you go past that, that's where the issues become noticeable with both heat and fan noise. So I'm not going to say that they've solved anything here or it's anything different. It's just the actual line has been pushed a bit further out. When you compare this to something like the Xbox Ally X or the Asus ROG Ally X, those have awesome fan noise, awesome cooling, awesome all of that. And I would have liked to see like an Xbox Ally X with this processor stuck to just 30 or 35 watts, because that'd be amazing. Asus has really figured out cooling where GPD is still figuring it out. So long story short, I think up to 30 and 35 watts, this device does really good on the cooling and heat front, but past that is a little iffy. But the Win 5 is powerful. And so let's take a look at some games here, and I'm going to start with two that I had at max TDP just by accident while I was filming. But we have Days Gone here at 1080p, high settings, and it doesn't skip a beat. We are in the 90s and 100s for our frame rate on high here. And that is crazy awesome. Then we have Elden Ring, just the intro part here, since this isn't a game that I actually play. And we're at 1080p, maximum graphic settings, holding a nice 60 FPS throughout. And I think I likely had this capped or something because it never went above 60, but there's definitely enough power here to go past 60. So I'm not sure what went on here, but I apologize. Whatever. This was mistaken footage that I'm just including in the video. Now, all of the rest of the games that you see here are going to be capped to 30 watts for reasons that I talked about before. It is the best TDP for heat and fan noise. And so, God of War Ragnarok is playing beautifully here at 1080p, medium settings, and FSR 3 is set to quality, just consistently in the 70s and above for frame rate. Assassin's Creed Shadows, a harder game to run at 1080p, medium settings, and FSR is set to quality, and we are in the 40s range here for the most part. Shadows is a beautiful game, even at these settings, but it's the consistency of the frame rate and everything that makes this an awesome experience. Then we have Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, 1080p, medium and high settings, and while the game itself does have a few dips and all of that on occasion, you are regularly in the 70s and 80s for frame rate here, and that's awesome too. Now with all of these games, you can go much higher for TDP, like I said before. But again, I have found 30 to 35 watts to be the sweet spot. A lot of people are going to be curious about Baldur's Gate 3, and this is at 1080p, no upscaling at all, medium settings in Act 3, and we are in the 50s and 60s just running around Rivington. And if you're curious about Lower City, it is actually the same, maybe a bit higher here. But honestly, you can't play Baldur's Gate 3 on a handheld any better than this. Everyone's favorite benchmark game, Cyberpunk 2077, at 1080p, FSR 3 set to balanced, medium and high settings, and it is just 60s and up. There is probably a ton of optimizations that you can do here if you wanted to, but I just choose a preset and I go play the game. That's how I like to do things. Star Wars Fallen Order is one of my favorite test games because this rarely ever runs well on handhelds. And I'm here at 1080p, epic settings, and it just doesn't drop below 60. This game is awesome, weighed down by performance issues over the years, but thankfully the Max 385 that I have here can brute force everything nicely. And speaking of brute forcing a game, Hogwarts Legacy, another game known for performance issues, and it's a bit hard to run, but we have it here at 1080p, high settings, and if we ignore the dips that are caused by the game, which again is a game issue, we are regularly in the 60s to 70s range, depending on where we're at and how many enemies are on screen, which in this case, it was a large battle, and we were still holding pretty well. Then there's The Witcher 3, 1080p, ultra settings, and yeah, it's high frame rates as you would expect, 60s and up throughout, which on ultra is just awesome. You could lower to high if you wanted to for even better frame rates, but this is how I would personally play it. Jumping over into Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and before Shadows, this was the harder to run Assassin's Creed game. We're at 1080p, high settings, and it is 60s throughout, which is just crazy. I remember having to try to run this game on low settings on other handhelds and just struggling with it to get good playable frame rates. Last on the list is Black Myth Wukong, naturally. 1080p, FSR 3, no frame gen, and we are at high settings. And we're in the 40s, basically, with some dips down to the 30s and so on. I would probably drop this down to medium settings for a bit of a bump, but I do like how the game looks on high. It's a nice looking game. So it's kind of obvious after seeing all of these games, and to get ahead of anybody asking me to test a game to see if it runs, the answer is yes. I have played through a bunch of my higher end, more difficult to run games through this device, and not a single one had an issue, playing at playable frame rates. So the answer to if the Win 5 can run your game is yes. I mentioned it before, but I've been using Bazzite on the Win 5 fully, and it's been a decent experience. There is still some weird bugs and things, like the TDP reverts on boot. Opening handheld daemon is weird because you have to spam the keyboard button for whatever reason, and it doesn't always show up. There is some weird bug where out of sleep mode, the Wi-Fi just doesn't turn back on, and the back buttons, L4 and R4, don't work as of yet. That also doesn't work on Windows side. This is a GPD thing. Like the Win Mini last year, it took them months to make the back buttons usable. I'm going to assume it's going to take months for the back buttons to be usable on the GPD Win 5 as well. The display is a 7-inch IPS 120Hz VRR 1080p display, likely the same that the Asus Allies use, but I can't confirm that. I've always been a fan of this display. It's no OLED, that's for sure, but I've enjoyed it on the Allies, and it works well here too. I would obviously love an OLED display though. The speakers, at least on Bazzite, are rough, as you'd expect. On Windows, they're great, and there is some fixes like DTS Ultra and things you can do on the Windows side to make them even better. But on Bazzite, even with James DSP and DEC SP, I haven't been able to find a good answer to make these good speakers. It is the usual negative when you deal with Linux, and the fact that Linux just doesn't have good audio with these devices compared to Windows, but hopefully it is something that the Bazzite team can fix in the future. The controls, though, are actually great. I am a big fan of the larger cap-style capacitive joysticks that they're using here. The Vita-style D-pad is also feeling like the best that GPD has ever made, and I like that here. We have nice, bigger buttons, which GPD has never really done in the past. They usually have smaller buttons, but they're nice and big here, and they're not silent, but they're not super loud either. I am not a massive fan of the triggers on the back. I find them to be a bit uncomfortable to use with not a lot of play. There's also switches on the back to turn them into micro switch triggers if you want to, and I have found that this doesn't work well at all. When I turn it into this mode, not all of the trigger registers as a button click. And so I have to put my fingers in weird positions to find the actual spot that works. And so I didn't really like this. I usually just keep this in analog mode, and I've kind of forgotten that it has the dual mode triggers. And that brings me to the comfort and ergonomics, and it's fine. It's not bad, but I wouldn't say it's good either. GPD continued the design of the Win 4 here by including the little lip at the bottom, and that has the menu and volume controls on either side. But that lip gets into your hands and palm often. I ended up grabbing a really expensive TPU case off of AliExpress, but it's actually a hard plastic. It isn't that soft, rubbery TPU like the AYN Thor uses, for example. And so it actually made the sides worse, and it actually made holding the device worse. So I can't actually recommend you buy the TPU case. I think comfort is an area they likely could have improved upon here. I'm not going to say it's bad. It's definitely not a hindrance to me. I've been able to use it for a month now, just fine. But there are little things they could have done to make this better to hold, which hopefully for the next one is something they can do. Now, what's awesome tied to comfort is the weight of this. This is 565 grams. It is super, super light. That's awesome. Now, obviously that is not including the battery, which the battery adds like 300 and something grams to it. It's insane. Without the battery, which is how I used it, it's probably the lightest PC handheld that I can think of that I've ever used. I'd have to look back, but it's definitely super light, and that's awesome. But let's wrap things up here. I am actually super surprised by the GPD Win 5. I wasn't expecting to like this at all. I had no interest in it leading up to the announcement, and then on a whim, I bought one, and I actually like it quite a bit. Now, the one big elephant in the room here is the One X Fly Apex is releasing really soon. I have that on pre-order as well, and so that is expected to be delivered in the next few weeks. That is a direct competitor to the GPD Win 5, considering it's using the same processors and all of that. So, I can't give you a recommendation at this point until I've seen that device. Then I'll kind of compare the two and see which one is the best and then give a recommendation. I think overall the GPD Win 5 is good, but it goes back to what I said earlier. I would love to see an Xbox Ally X with the Max 385 or Max plus 395 capped to 30 to 35 watts, and that's it. That's all you have to do, right? Because that's all I'm using this device as, is 30 to 35 watts, which is what the Xbox Ally X currently does. And if we had that cooling, that fan noise, and that device comfort and all of that, that would probably be my perfect device going forward. As is, the GPD Win 5 is an awesome first generation product for the Strix Halo processors. I am on the fence as to whether it's something I'm going to keep or not. Again, we'll see how the One X Fly Apex does when I get it in, and then I'll probably decide between all three devices, including the Xbox Ally X. But if you want power, and that's really what you want, GPD Win 5 has got it. It's tough for me calling this a handheld because without the battery, it's not really something that you can bring portably with you. But if your main use case is next to a power outlet of some sort, and you want the best performance, then this is it. Without streaming, of course, which would be a lot better. So right now, I'm undecided. We'll revisit this when I get the One X Fly Apex, and then we'll talk about both devices. Let me know what your thoughts are on the GPD Win 5 if you have one, or if it's on your radar. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk all about handhelds like this one. Support me through YouTube membership if you like my stuff. And hope you all have a good one.